Hey, hey, hey! Welcome to On the Fringe. I'm Gavin with my good friend Dave. We're going to talk about the big airline that couldn't.
We're talking about Indigo.
IndiGo is the largest airline in India. They've got about 60 to 65% of the market share. And over the last week, we're recording this at the end of the first week of December in 2025. They had a major, major meltdown, a schedule meltdown in terms of flight delay and then cancellation. In fact, on Friday, the 5th, they canceled over 1,000 flights throughout India. That's about half of the number of flights that they would fly in a day. Absolutely incredible scenes of people being stuck at the airport. We're in the middle of the holiday season. We're also, importantly for India, in the middle of wedding season. People are getting married left, right, and center. So people missed weddings, people missed funerals, people missed medical appointments, people were just not moving for about 3 days. And right now, I believe on Sunday, it's back to about 95% of scheduled flights are running, but it was a catastrophe. Scenes of people abandoned at the airport for literally days without food, without water, without any idea of when their flight would leave. People angrily throwing empty water bottles at Perspex screens as a sort of confused airline staff cower behind them. Anyways, not a particularly good look for anyone. Dave, how did we get here?
Well, India passed a new law earlier this year. It was passed, I believe, in January, and then it was just came into effect December 1st. And India has changed the regulations for pilots to get rest. So Indian pilots now have to get an additional 12 hours of rest per week, and they can do a maximum of 2 night landings per week. They also have to get additional rest time in addition to their vacation and leave. And Indigo was not prepared for these changes. This comes on the back of 2 weeks ago. Indigo had grounded their entire A320 fleet. They operate about 235 of these aircraft due to software problems. So they've had problems in the
And
last couple of
Dave,
weeks with getting
Dave,
planes off the ground. And then now
Just
they
to
have pilots.
clarify, that's the Airbus A320, right?
Correct. Airbus A320.
And
And
so they initially blamed a lot of the problems on that, correct?
well, that also weather, also some things on scheduling, congestion, lots of just very general problems that you go to the airport and your flight's late. Yeah, this is pretty much the standard operating procedure of why your flight's late. They're not telling anybody anything.
Well,
In
they
fact,
dropped that around Friday or Saturday when their CEO, Peter Elbers, formerly of KLM, had to give a televised public apology to the people of India. And we were both discussing this earlier. This is one of the worst apologies I've ever seen.
yeah.
It sounded like some intern had scripted it on Gemini,
Or a middle
you know,
school student,
or a
potentially.
middle. Well, I don't know. I feel like my middle school students could do better than that. I don't know. It was pretty bad. It was very wooden. He was clearly reading off a teleprompter. He looked like he hadn't slept in about 2 days, which honestly,
I wouldn't be shocked.
I kind of get that.
Yeah.
I kind of get that. I
And that's
think
not just
he,
because he wants to have the passenger experience at Delhi Airport.
you know, those Dutch executives get very committed to that. Um, so yeah, it was a full on disaster. And I've been hearing horror stories from people I know who got stuck in airports. It has disrupted business meetings, it's disrupted conferences, it's disrupted public events throughout the country. Everyone knows someone who is affected by this. Again, They're 65% of the entire civil aviation market in India. And
And
formerly had such a reputation for timeliness and efficiency. That is now gone.
yes, it is. And just to give you guys a quick picture of the industry in India, Indigo is the largest player. Next is Air India. And Air India has kind of been put together. It's been around for a long time. It was, I think, still is the flagship airline of the country. They've recently bought a couple of other airlines and they're integrating them into Air India. And the total is about, I think, 26% of
Mhm.
market share within the country. So outside of those two airlines, there really isn't a third player in India.
There really isn't. There used to be Vistara, they got gobbled up by Air India. There used to be Air Asia India, that also, I believe, got absorbed by Air India in the
Yep.
end.
Yep.
And there was Jet. Now, Jet had a very good reputation, but Jet Airlines was basically allowed to go bankrupt. They asked the government essentially for a bailout, and the government was like, straightforwardly, we don't get involved in this. Behavior that has been starkly contrasted to what just happened over the last week.
Hmm.
So, this catastrophe unfolded, Dave, and then Indigo went to the central government, specifically the Civil Aviation Ministry, and said, we can get our house in order, but we need 2 months abeyance of the regulations. And they were granted that. And I believe you informed me the abeyance only applies to the A320s, um,
Yes.
but the
But it's still their
A320s
workforce, their main workhorse.
A320s are the bulk of their fleet. This is a stark departure from previous government involvement in the aviation industry. And I think it is also an indicator for a lot of people that far from being a sort of neutral observer, the civil aviation ministry has favorites and they just played their hand.
And two, on top of that, Indigo is a private company, correct?
Yes, it is.
And
Indigo is, so is Air India at this point.
and Jet Airways was as well, from my understanding.
Yep. Yes, this is
Interesting.
a non-nationalized market. When did Tata buy Air India? That was in the last couple of years. It was in 2022,
Yeah, 2022. They bought them for it was over 2 billion.
$2.4 billion. dollars.
Yep.
So that was in 2022. Yeah, and previously, I think really until the 90s, it was all nationalized. It was all pretty much Air India. There shouldn't really be this level of government involvement. And certainly there were a lot of people who are upset that this is the form it took, particularly because it seems like the Civil Aviation Ministry had no idea that this was going on, which is hard to believe because the law that went into effect December 1st was signed into law in January of this year. I believe it was January of this year. So, it's been on the books for a while, and no one, if you believe the press releases, no one in Indigo thought this would be an issue. They didn't change their schedule at all or their pilot roster. And no one in the government had any idea that they weren't doing this. There's 65% of the market, and this is, if you're in the civil aviation ministry, this is your only job. The only job you have is to administer civil aviation. And you didn't know that the largest company in the country in your specific field was planning to just completely ignore the flagship law of the last 10 years when it comes to pilot regulation.
Well, Gavin, I'm gonna put my tinfoil hat on real quick.
But so am I, man. I I'm getting mine on too because man, this
And
is a situation that calls for it.
I really think Indigo thought they could get away with ignoring this legal change. and they saw the Civil Aviation Authority as being weak. They're like, well, these guys are just going to cave in because in the past, Air India pilots would go to the Indian government and say, we're not going to work. We want you to give us more pay. And the government would cave in. So Indigo is doing exactly the same thing, and they're getting away with it. Are they getting away with it 100%? No, they can't fly everything, but they can still operate over 200 A320 aircraft. And the Indian government knows that if Indigo does shut down for a long time, the whole entire country is going to come to a standstill because India is dependent on Indigo. And there's probably too much money that's going to be lost if this is enforced to the books. It's not going to be enforced as it is written.
And this just opens up a massive can of worms and I think forces people to confront just an awkward truth, which is that the economic reforms that have been carried out in this country over the last 10 years have not necessarily resulted in more competitiveness in the marketplace. And when you have what's essentially a duopoly in commercial aviation, you have a situation where one company can effectively hold the whole country to ransom.
And the
And
passengers, especially, I mean, the passengers are essentially being held for ransom at the airports for
yeah,
as long as it takes Indigo to get their planes back in the air.
yeah. Now this is a bit of a problem, as you might imagine. It's going to be a point of public debate going forward. But yeah, this has been, I think, a really embarrassing episode for the country and certainly for Indigo. Whether or not they realized it or not, the mask has come off, and no one is particularly happy with what they're seeing.
Well, no. And this just shines light on the fact that India needs more competition in its civil
Mm,
aviation industry, and it's probably not going to get it if the government is picking favorites. And ultimately, the Indian consumer is going to lose here because the Indian consumer is going to be stuck with airlines that can basically do whatever they want. And the consumer buys a ticket. There's no reason at all that the airline actually has to fulfill that promise that they've made to the passenger who's going to fly. And this hurts India's credibility. I think if they want to get more FDI and they want to build their aviation sector that they're trying to build, and they've been trying to build for such a long time, this does not help the country. It
no.
actually makes them look really bad.
And again, when you develop these oligopolies, when you develop these duopolies, or even monopolies in some cases, you create situations where what is good and correct for the company in terms of the bottom line is not going to be good for the country. And you may make a hostage out of yourself if you put all of your eggs in one basket and then the people carrying the basket decide that they're going to redesign it mid shopping trip. I mean, to really stretch this already thin metaphor. And that's kind of what's happened here. No one, except possibly people within Indigo and the Civil Aviation Ministry, I don't think anyone is happy about this. And I genuinely, a lot of people in India were very happy with Indigo. I mean, I was very happy with Indigo because for me, they've been a consistently good airline. I've been taking them for the last 4 years. I've never had a problem. Now, I'm genuinely going to think about, well, do I really want to book this flight? Because until there's sort of an end to the saga where it's clear they're not going to do something like this again, or something like this won't be allowed to happen every time there's a legal change that threatens the bottom line. I don't know. I think it's right and correct to have some trepidation about booking on that kind of an airline.
Well, you brought up a really good point earlier, too, that Indigo has added a bunch of new routes in the last
Mm,
couple of months. They're becoming an airline that's going to connect the whole entire world, similar to
yeah.
what the Middle Eastern airlines, similar to Qatar and Emirates and Etihad, connect Europe with Asia through India instead of doing it through the UAE or Qatar or Turkey. And this does not help them to do that. If they're expanding their routes and they're destroying their brand at the same time, they're not going to have anybody on these flights. They're not going to have people from India flying. And if the major news headlines about IndiGo, people aren't going to fly them.
No, no, they're not. I think actually, if this was even semi-intentional, I think in the long run, this was a very disastrous thing for someone to have allowed to have happened
Hmm.
because it's just maybe short term it gets you where you want to go, but long term, this is going to affect their reputation. And again, like up until now, their reputation is basically, I wouldn't say it's been spotless, but it's been pretty close. This is now going to really put the brakes on probably a fair amount of FDI. This is going to give people pause in other civil aviation authorities outside of India. Do we really want to work with these people?
Well, and two,
This, no, go ahead.
this affects their whole civil aviation sector as well, because you
Hmm.
have Air India, which has always been a laggard. They've always punched well under their weight, and they've lost $1.1 billion so far this year. They're losing money. It's not a well-run operation, and it's very hard to integrate all of these smaller airlines that they've bought into Air India. And now you have this happening with Indigo. And this goes back to the Indian government's plan of we want India to be the connecting point for Asia and Europe in terms of logistics and moving people and as a way to get investment and get people to come to the country. It's not good for the country long term, as you said. This is a horrible thing that I think people are going to look back in a couple of years and go, this was the wrong decision for the Indian government to do, to give these guys leeway to fly aircraft and skirt the law because they thought they could do it. And they're just taking advantage of their position in the country, and the government is not being strong when it should be strong and it should put its foot down.
I agree. Anyways, thank you for listening. If you agreed or disagreed or want to give me free tickets on Indigo, please get in touch. I'd appreciate that very much. I just want to be clear. Give me free tickets for not talking about Indigo. That's the deal. So if you want to give me, if Indigo wants to give me free tickets and I'll stop talking about them, joking, of course, I would never do that. But if you want to drop by, it's okay. Thank you for listening. Please like, comment, subscribe. We appreciate our On the Fringe community. And yeah, thanks for listening. We're on the fringe. Hit the button, Dave.